Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Bearded Robot podcast with me, Peter, and my co-host Danny.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, bit of a long time coming. I think you'd agree, Dan.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, we've talked about it for a little while,
yeah,
and been meaning to we've done a few little trial things in the past, but looking forward to getting this up and running, maybe.
yeah. I think Bearded, for anyone that doesn't know, so I'm Peter, and we've got Danny here as well. We created Bearded Robot essentially as a website for reviewing games, previewing games, and news, and also involved TV shows, board games, anything kind of nerdy, basically. So we're kind of all stuff we're into. So,
Yeah,
but life kind of takes over, and you get bogged down with things and kids and life and work,
yeah,
and it becomes quite hard to write. Like a 1,000 word article or whatever. Even once a week. And I think something like this is
yeah,
would be good for us to give a go. And I think the general idea is going to be to to create podcast episodes based on stuff that's we're into at that particular moment. So whether
yeah.
it's a TV show,
We might do retrospectives and sort of things
yeah,
like that as and when, sort of just see whatever really we fancy talking about.
absolutely. And of course, we're open to ideas. So if anyone is listening to this and has some ideas of stuff they would like us to talk about, then we're absolutely always be up for it. We generally like to talk about stuff that we're not only into, but we're really knowledgeable about. Something that
Yeah,
we've really put a lot of time into. So obviously, spoiler in the title, we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy VII Remake today, but it made sense to kind of do a bit of an intro, just to kind of kick off what Bearded Robot is all about, what the podcasts are going to be about, and a bit about who we are. So, I thought a good place to start, Dan,
yep,
if it's cool with you, was just to talk about remakes in general, because
yeah,
I don't know about you, but it feels like remakes are quite a hot thing to do at the moment.
yeah, definitely. I
There's a
mean,
lot. You've just played.
Tony Hawk's 1 and 2 just got announced, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Literally just been announced, and I know you've been playing you've been playing Resident Evil Nemesis recently, haven't you?
Yeah, so that was really good, and obviously number Resident Evil 2 come out last year. That was also excellent as
Yeah,
well. There's been a lot of. I mean, obviously it's very different from a reboot, like say for example the Shadow of the Colossus reboot that come out on the PS3, whereas that was just pretty much exactly the same, just spiced up
yeah,
graphics. This one, as well as obviously Final Fantasy VII remake, they've obviously changed a lot of it.
yeah.
You
That's a
know,
really good point. And so what that just on that then, where do you stand in terms of remakes? I mean, I know where I stand. I'll say what I think afterwards. But when it comes to a remake, do you think a remake should be a remake, or are you happy for them to draw outside the lines?
well, I'm like most people. I'm very skeptical when it comes to a remake because certain things, such as like Resident Evil 3 and Final Fantasy, they're very much great, fantastic memories of
Yeah,
mine, and you don't want anyone to ruin it, and despoil it in a
yeah,
sense. Because you think of films, some remake films. Normally, they're not as good as the original.
yeah,
So the games, you fear that they could suffer that. But to be fair, as of late, a lot of the remakes that have come out have been, top notch, or at least
yeah.
well thought out.
Yeah, I think Resident Evil is a good example because Resident Evil 2 was a. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and you know a lot more about the Resident Evil series than me, but it felt to me that Resident Evil 2 was a lot more. It was a proper remake. It was an actual.
Yeah,
There was a lot about it was pretty much a remake, and we'll go on to
yeah.
it. But it's pretty much the same with Final Fantasy VII,
I
actually.
think that the good thing about a remake, and they did it well with Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2, they didn't hit it as well with Resident Evil 3, and they've
Yeah,
done it brilliantly with Final Fantasy, is that a remake shouldn't just it shouldn't copy it word for word. Fine if it wants to do that, that's perfect. It
yeah,
should expand upon it. It should have everything that is in the original and then just expand upon it and add more in.
yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah,
feel that that's really what they've done with Resident Evil 2. Not as much with Resident Evil 3 because they
That's
did
it.
change a lot, but it was still very good game. You know.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, I think I'm in the same boat, if I'm being honest. I am very much a fan. If something is a remake, I do think it should be remade properly. And
Mm.
I'm not such a skeptical person actually when it comes to remakes. I'm usually all for them because generally speaking, if something's remade and I don't enjoy it, it never really, personally anyway, it never really takes away anything from the original for me. I kind of see it
It,
as
it, sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on, mate.
no, yeah, no, that was it really, yeah.
Oh no, I meant what I thought was it kind of leaves me with a feeling of like, oh, you know, they could have done this
Yeah,
and they could have
yeah,
done
that's
that.
frustrating.
That's only the times when the remakes
Yeah.
come out
Yeah,
bad, you know.
that's a really good point, and we've seen it when it's not. Listen, it's not a remake, but we've seen it slightly with, say, for example, The Walking Dead, where we've kind of been like, "Oh, this feels like the one that got away. I wish they had
Yeah.
done it like this," you know. And you do sometimes feel like that. I mean, you know, again, it's not a remake; it's transitioning from a book to a TV show. But Game of Thrones was another example of, you know, the dreaded Game of Thrones, which we must not speak about ever again. You know, that was a classic example of what could have been. I mean, wow,
Yeah.
they nailed it, and then they went off the rails. They ended it in their own way, which was not true to the books, and
Mm.
that's fine. And that's just about how it's been done. And
But as avid fans of the book and obviously avid fans of some of these original games or TV shows or whatever that have been remade, we are left thinking, oh, I wish they had that bit in it, or I wish they had, you know, put that in it, you know, and we're
yeah,
always left wanting a little bit more, you know, and
yeah,
that's the good thing about these remakes, like say Resident Evil and Final Fantasy 7. I got to stop talking about Resident Evil now. The whole point of this is Final Fantasy 7. But yeah, so Final Fantasy 7 is that they do have, I feel personally that they've added in pretty much everything from the original, you know,
yeah.
at least with regards to Final Fantasy 7, only the first bit of the game, of course, you
Yeah,
know.
I think it's worth noting as well, that we're not actually going to dwell too much on the ending. We may do a separate podcast on that, but the actual ending of Final Fantasy, it does kind of move away from that slightly. Also, a slight caveat in here as well, that whilst Dan has completed most of the game, he's not actually finished Final Fantasy 7 Remake yet. So yeah, we're not going to fully talk about the ending just yet, but we will
No.
do that. But generally speaking, you're right. It's funny with Final Fantasy 7 Remake that literally 98% of the game is a true remake,
Mm.
which is, you know, just wow, really. But anyway, moving on from that. So, you know, remakes in general, I think it's safe to say we're both all for that, and I am, you know, completely on board with. And
Yeah.
by the way, I just want to say I'm completely all in on this Final Fantasy VII remake. However long it takes them to come out, whatever consoles it is, if it's accessible for me, I'm all in, and I'm
Mm.
going to play it and I'm going to enjoy it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to just be down on it for the sake that it may be in future episodes of Final Fantasy VII remake they move away from the original and stuff like that. I'm not in on just beating them to the ground for that. I'm in on giving this a go. And
Yeah, I mean, we'll obviously touch on this towards the end of the
yeah,
podcast, but it does obviously leave us wondering if, you know, how is it going to push forward and this, that,
yeah,
or the other, you know.
for
But
sure.
but for me, when it first was announced, you know, I was skeptical only because of, again, you know, how I feel about remakes and stuff like that. You know,
Yeah,
I'm all for it, but of course there was a lot of how the battle system was changed and
absolutely.
everything like that. And I know you enjoyed, you really enjoyed the battle system of Final Fantasy 15,
Hmm.
and you just recently replayed the remaster. Sorry, let's not get them mixed up. The remaster of 12 as well, Final Fantasy
Yes.
12, that
Oh,
you quite
yes. And I do
enjoyed as
really want to
well.
touch on that at some point as well, because some of the stuff in 12 should have absolutely been included in remake, in my opinion. Final Fantasy 7 remake, in my opinion, and I'll absolutely touch on that. But we'll definitely come back to
Okay,
that.
yeah,
Okay, cool. So Final Fantasy 7, the original, and can I just say that I just want to add a caveat in here. If you're here listening to this podcast about Final Fantasy 7 remake, I am going to assume, or we are going to assume, that you have played it, you've completed it, or you're not sensitive to spoilers. So from now, we are going to go into spoiler territory. There are going to be spoilers. If you don't want to be spoiled, then hit pause on this podcast and come back when you finish the game.
But really, you should have probably played the original by now. So, if anything, you're the one in the wrong.
Yeah,
here,
you're the problem there. Yeah, by the way, I was doing some research, Dan, and you'll be interested to know. And obviously, 1997 when the original came out, but it was actually, can you believe it? It was actually 2005 when Final Fantasy VII Remake was teased. It was teased as a tech. Do you remember it was a tech demo for the PS3?
Yeah, it was the beginning. It was the beginning intro, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, and then they officially announced it 10 years later, 2015, and then of course we've only just got it. It's been 5 years in development. I mean, this is a long time we've waited. So yeah, Final Fantasy VII original. So I just want to kind of go over my thoughts and feelings.
How many times do you reckon you've played the original?
Oh wow! Well,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
No, it's cool. I reckon probably about 10, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, what, full run throughs? Yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, easily about that much.
Yeah, I reckon full run throughs. I'm talking, when you actually commit yourself to doing 50 hours, of the game. Because the original was about 50 hours long, right?
Yeah, I think I could easily. Yeah, well, I think I could get up to the North Crater, which, if you're not very familiar with, it's the last sort of major section of disc 3, because it was 3 discs long on the original PlayStation. I could get up to the North Crater in about 36 hours for some reason. I've got that in my head, that it's 36 hours.
Yeah. No,
so it's a big old, stint.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, Final Fantasy VII Original, I just want to talk a little bit about what it means to me, and then I'll kind of ask you as well. So, Final Fantasy VII, the original game, it would have made me 1997. It would have made me 11 years old when it first came out, and I would say the original to me, the best way to sum up the original to me is that it literally has shaped my gaming life. That may sound a little bit dramatic, but literally this game is everything. The way that it introduced me to RPGs, it introduced me to a battle system and a turn-based system, and it introduced me to a strategic approach with the battle system, which I love, and it introduced me to characters that I've kind of fell in love with for over 20 years now, and that's insane. So to hear there was going to actually be a remake was really exciting for me personally, and yeah, it's a concept. The game as a concept is just phenomenal. What's your earliest memories of Final Fantasy?
Yeah. Oh, I've actually got a really funny earliest memory. I do remember it because my brother rented it from Blockbusters. Let's say, I can't remember if it was, but he rented it from Blockbusters, and he couldn't get past the Scorpion boss. I think it was the fact you couldn't attack it when it's tower up, and he's only a couple of years older than me. And like you say, I was 10 or 11 at the time, and he was like, "Oh no, this is rubbish." And so therefore, I always had it in my head that Final Fantasy was rubbish until I, because me and Peter used to go to school together, until you showed me it when we were probably about 14 or something like that. And then we started playing through it, and then that kind of really opened my eyes to it. And like you say, it introduced me to like RPG kind of games, because before that it was all platform based or Grand Theft Auto or things like that, really.
Yeah, no,
but no, you're definitely. It's definitely a monumental game that has shaped my tastes almost. Like I've played pretty much every Final Fantasy since then.
Yeah, and
some of them obviously being a lot better than others, but none of them are going to be better than this one. This is the pinnacle for me.
It is the pinnacle, and it's almost become a little bit. It's almost become a little bit of a meme, hasn't it? It's almost become a little bit too mainstream ideal to love Final Fantasy VII, and
Yeah.
it's kind of one of those situations where it had such a big following from people of around our age when they were in their kind of young teens and growing up and developing, that it's kind of almost like, oh, Final Fantasy VII isn't
Yeah,
my
very impressionable.
yeah. It's funny really. I actually
Yeah.
you reminded me there. One of mine and Danny's good friends. He once told me a funny story about Final Fantasy VII, the original as well, and you'll remember that when characters talk amongst themselves, they kind of, you're always playing as Cloud, and when the characters come out and talk amongst themselves, they kind of just appear walking out of Cloud, and then they all kind of
Oh yeah.
they all kind of talk to each other, and that was obviously because they couldn't have. I mean, in Final Fantasy VIII, they were running around physically after you. Final Fantasy VII, the characters kind of walked into Cloud to show that that was, Cloud was your party. You just have to imagine that your team are there with Cloud, and
Mm.
he actually thought there was something wrong with the game. So he got up to the first reactor where you go up the lift, and Barrett kind of just walks out of Cloud and appears and then starts talking to him. He thought, this game is jubbing out. This game's having issues. And I'm going to send this game back. And it just goes to show, doesn't it, how far we've come? I mean, it's inexcusable now that something like that would be part of a game, and
if they had kept that in the remake, that would have been disgusting.
It'd been hilarious. Now, obviously, technology's moved on now, and that wouldn't even be contemplated. But back then, Final Fantasy VII, the original on PlayStation, the graphics were phenomenal. The size was phenomenal. I mean, it was on 3 discs, right? It was a gigantic game, and back then as well, can I just point out, when me and Danny were completing Final Fantasy VII, the original, when we were younger, there was no internet, there was no looking up how to beat a boss and looking up strategies and stuff like that. You just had to beat the fucker on your own, and that was hard, right?
Yeah.
You think about some of those bosses now. You look up a YouTube strategy of the certain magic that you need to use, whereas back then you were figuring out it all on your own, and a lot of games have lost. I mean, even with Remake,
I already did that on this remake already.
I'm just about to say the same thing. Even with Remake, I have actually looked up a couple of strategies a few times because I thought, Christ, how do you get this fucking hell house out of its god mode? I have no idea how to beat this thing, but we'll move on to that, because I know you've got a big beef with that, and I kind of share that beef, so we'll get onto that. But Final Fantasy VII, the original, I think it's safe to say that myself and Dan are giant fans. We have been for a long time. This is a gigantic step in our kind of gaming commitment life, individually, to take on this game and see it for what it is, as a remake, and reimagine everything that we're kind of already made up in our head. Because let's remember that with games like Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation, you had to also make a lot up in your head, because it was always top down. You could never look up and see the plates above you in Midgar. You could never understand.
That's true.
You could never understand the scale of Midgar. You could never understand that, and you had to make that up in your head. You had to kind of convince yourself, yeah, I'm living in a breathing sea. Whereas in Remake, you are in a breathing sea, and they've done that amazingly, which we'll obviously move on to. Also, can I just point out, before we move on to talking about the remake, that I just want to talk about pronunciation. So myself and Dan, mate, we were we're 11 years old, okay? So we're reading text, which is translated from Japanese game developers. So we're not far off. But if any pronunciations are slightly off, then I don't give a shit personally.
I've got a bit of dyslexia as well. So certain games. So Final Fantasy VIII was really bad for me, because obviously Final Fantasy VII, I had you telling me what it said. So you said, "Oh, her name's Tifa. This is called Mako," etc. So I was just going from what you said. Whereas Final Fantasy VIII, I played more on my own, and so Laguna Loire to me was Lugana Law. And so that was fucking awful. You know, that's the worst name I've ever heard.
Well, yeah, and can I just say that actually I may have even got it wrong. I mean, in remake, it's obviously Tifa and it's Mako, but yeah, I've always called it Mako. I've always called her Tifa, but I will try my best to pronounce it correctly in the podcast. But yeah, listen, that doesn't matter. It's neither.
Oh, do we have to?
No, you don't have to. And if anyone slags you off for it, then they're slagging off a disability. So that they're the bad guy. Um, so let's talk about the remake. That's why we're here. So I want to kind of I just want to gather your overall thoughts on the remake. So did you enjoy it? Overall, what did you think? What do you think of Final Fantasy VII Remake?
Yeah, I'm really am enjoying it. You know, obviously, like you say, I haven't finished it yet, but I'm really close, and I do unfortunately know the spoilers because I originally weren't going to play it, only because I've got an Xbox, you know, so the games on the PlayStation I don't really play as much, but I did make an exception for this just because it was like, you know what, it's too tempting. I've got to crack on and do it. But no, I am really enjoying it. I mean, don't get me wrong. There are some parts they've added in that have kind of, you know, sometimes it does feel a bit dragged out because, like we say, it isn't a full remake. It isn't a remake of the entire game. It's only a remake of the first 5 hours, 4 or 5 hours of the original game.
Yeah.
And so it's that pretty much bulked out. Probably going on longer than the original game, just for those 4 or 5 hours, you know.
No, I think you're right. Yeah,
but yeah, no, it really is. It really is. It is well done. You know, they've taken a lot of time, and it's the little it's the little things. It's the little things that you really do notice. Being an avid fan, you kind of see those little bits and bobs that you think, oh, that's good. They've added that in. Oh, wicked! I forgot about that. You know,
it's true. I think, you know, like from, you know, just watching that. I mean, that intro, by the way, I could watch a million times and not get bored of it. That is one of the Final Fantasy VII Remake intro is one of the best intros I've ever seen. And maybe I'm clouded by, you know, a slight bit of nostalgia, but even with the added bits, you know, like the you know, you see the kids riding on the bike and you see a buzz in Midgar, but you've also got this kind of this amazing sense of dread coming with this kind of music playing in the background, which, you know, it's just phenomenal.
Well, it's like what you said. It's like what you said, that the game really does, like the original, it's kind of, you can't look up and see the plates, whereas with this, they've really tried to make it a living, breathing world by giving, you know, obviously using the capabilities of the PlayStation as much as possible.
Sure.
So if you want to go around that corner and look, you can see what's round there. Whereas in the original, you could probably just run past it and it would be fixed camera.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, no, I completely agree. And I think for me, I mean, I completely agree. I actually think I think Final Fantasy VII Remake is a phenomenal game. I think it's near perfect. I genuinely mean that. There's been so many moments where I've just kind of had to stop. This is a genuine story. When I first started Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Cloud jumps down off of the train. I was sitting there with my wife, and she was kind of watching me geek out over it, and I kind of just stood there, just circling the camera around Cloud, and like, I genuinely mean this, right? Where I circled the camera for about 5 minutes just around Cloud, looking at all the details on his character model and the details of the train. I was just like, this is how I imagined it looking when I played the original. This is amazing. And I
can't see any difference between that and the original.
No, it's true. No, you're absolutely right, and that's what the original does so well. It kind of makes this giant buzz in Midgar up in your head. But I actually took my first step with Cloud and made a point. I moved the controller up slightly, and I made a point of saying, "Oh my God, this is the first time since 1997 that I've taken my first step with Cloud again." Just a different character model. So I've done it so many times with Cloud in the original, but I'm doing this in the remake, and it was just a really amazing moment. And seeing the Buster Sword, you know, with the materia slots, no materia junctions yet, but seeing the materia slots there and all the little improvements that they've made, it's just such a brilliant game. And I want to move on to details about why it's such a good game, which we will do. But I just wanted to kind of give an overall impression of what we both thought, and I think it's safe to say, Dan, that we both loved it.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, so moving on then. You've mentioned this to me before, and I think it's a really good point. And the linearity of Final Fantasy VII Remake. I mean, were you happy with how linear the game is, as opposed to it being such an
Yeah,
open
I
Midgar?
do think that. Yeah, no, I do agree. I think the linearity of it works so much better than if it was an open world kind of game. If you had, right, here's all the slums, and here's, you know, here's Midgar, and you can explore it, and you can do loads of side quests, and, you know, we've made it an Assassin's Creed scowl type game. I don't think that would work as well for this kind of for how they've done it. I think it would feel a little too bulked out even more than what it is, you know. So,
Yeah,
but don't get me wrong. It's what they've added in is fine. They've got just enough side quests to not make it tedious, because obviously
yeah,
sometimes side quests are tedious. You know, they just go here,
without
kill
a
this,
doubt.
do that, job done. You know, and Final Fantasy VII does have quite a bit of that in this, but not too much. It's not got Assassin's Creed Origin style side quest, like the amount.
No. No, no, absolutely, and I
Yeah.
no, I completely agree. I wanted a linear story-driven Final Fantasy VII. I wanted it to be true to the remake in that sense. Obviously, going into the second game, that's going to be slightly different. I've got my own ideas of how that can work, which I'll move on to. But generally speaking, I really loved how linear it was, because it just allowed you to enjoy the world that you were in. You know, so don't get me wrong, some of the zones were a little bit bigger where you were doing side quests and stuff like that. But generally speaking, on those really important plot sections and dialogue sections, the way you could just look around and walk along and just look above you, look at every tiny detail of the slums and of the reactor and stuff like that. I just thought it was done so well, and I hope they do stick
Yeah, definitely.
that. I hope they do stick with that with the second instalment. And one way they could do that is how they did it in Final Fantasy 12. So they used these kind of big zones in Final Fantasy 12 where you could run around, do side missions, and you could explore kind of large areas before moving on to a next kind of linear section. So it's very similar to how Final Fantasy VII Remake works, but in a kind of bit more of an open world. You know, you're actually in the outdoors and you can travel to different places and stuff like that. And I mean, the one thing that Final Fantasy 12 did amazingly was hunts, where you picked up not only side quests but almost like a sub boss killing quests, where you know you have to go kill a giant fucking tomato or whatever. You know, like I can't remember what they're called. What are they called? The giant blowing up tomatoes.
The
I can't remember.
bombs.
Yeah,
The
but they're called.
bombs.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, those things. You
I
know,
think they're just called bombs, ain't they?
just full bombs. Yeah, maybe they are. I can't quite remember. But regardless, you actually go out and hunt a giant one, for example, and that's a complete side mission, you know, and that's one thing that they could do going into Final Fantasy VII Remake, the second part. They could kind of give you these opportunities to kind of go out hunting giant monsters and bigger, you know, optional side bosses and stuff like that. I think that would work really well, and maybe something they missed a trick with in this one. You know,
Yeah, definitely.
they kind of did it, didn't they? Where you would come across a side quest where someone said, you know, oh, a drake's been, you know, living in a warehouse. Can you go kill it? You know, and it's, you know, so you kind of get that, but
Yeah.
you never really got the feeling that you were on a proper monster hunt. You know, and that would have been really cool and something
One
that
thing I
again
will
they did
say
well.
with regards to one thing I will say with regards to the side quests is, even though there are some that do do feel a bit like, oh, for God's sake, this is, this is a bit long-winded, or this is a bit of a just go here and kill this. They did make them quite rewarding. It is
Yes,
well worth investing your time into them.
completely agree. Yeah, no, I completely agree, and that is the most that's the most important thing about side quests. I mean, I'm not, I'm looking at you, Assassin's Creed. That I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. It needs to be rewarding, and you need to have a reason to do these side quests without feeling. Sometimes Final Fantasy VII Remake did dip its toe into that kind of, oh God, do I really have to find another 4 kids? Do you know what I mean? That have gone off
Yeah,
on a
definitely.
runner. But then it did lead to good things. It led you to interacting differently with characters and earning new items, and all that kind of stuff. So, it did make it worth
I
it.
think the coolest thing that they've done was that things like, say, for example, you don't even realise it has an effect. Like, say, for example, the amount of side quests that you do in Sector 5 with Aerith affects what she wears for when she
Yeah.
goes to meet Don Corneo. So it kind of, you don't even realise that sometimes you are working towards something.
Yeah, they do hide that quite well, don't they? And it's the same. It's the same with Cloud's dress and stuff, I guess, as well. But yeah, it's that's a really good point, and it kind of gives it a little bit of replay value, I guess. That's one thing that does give good replay value. Plus that and the hard mode, which
Yeah,
I'll move on
definitely.
to at some point. But yeah, so speaking, we've spoken about the linear nature, a little bit about the story and our overall thoughts. What about the actual combat of Remake? I mean, I played Final Fantasy 15. I loved Final Fantasy 15, but can I say that you couldn't go back to Final Fantasy 15 now because the combat in 7 Remake is a lot better. I did enjoy the Final Fantasy
So would you
15
say it's an
combat.
expanded version of
Oh,
15?
without a doubt, without a doubt. You have reason to change characters in Remake. You have reason to you have reasons to stop the game and strategize if you're playing the normal mode. I'm talking about. You have a reason to kind of stop and kind of take stock and go, God, right, what shall I do next? Whose ATB gauge is up? This person is healing. Well, they can do that, and while this person kind of uses thunder on this enemy, um, and that was one really good. They really kept faithful with the original with how they did the combat. I think because whilst it was a massive improvement, or sorry, it was a massive change, it you did still have that kind of turn-based element to it. I personally loved the combat, but I knew roughly the combat I was going to go into based on 15. But I'm interested to know what you thought of it because you've not really you've probably not played a Final Fantasy with this kind of combat, really, have you? Apart from
No, not
13,
really. I
maybe,
mean,
but let's not talk about 13.
yeah, yeah. Less said about that, the better. So you might have heard me say earlier in the podcast that I didn't pick up this. I wasn't probably going to play this one, and
Yeah,
that might seem strange considering how much I was banging on earlier about, oh yeah, it's one of my favourite games, or you know, but really. The main reason was kind of the combat. It did kind of put me off a bit because,
yeah,
I do love the turn-based style of Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy 8, Final Fantasy 9, 10. I really do enjoy the way that they play. And for me, that is the heart and soul of the game, a
yeah,
turn-based RPG. However, having played Final Fantasy 7 Remake, it does work. I mean, there are times when it doesn't. There are only certain moments, but for the majority of it, for the most part, it works pretty similar to
yeah,
the original, but obviously at a faster pace. We're not
yeah,
we're not waiting around for somebody else to take their turn.
mm,
We're all kind of doing it all at once, kind of thing.
yeah, yeah. No, it's really great, and I love the way that you I love the way that you put the way that you've put that you didn't. I'm not sure a lot of people would understand what you mean by that when you say they've not changed much from the original in terms of combat. I mean, clearly they have, but I completely get where you're coming from. That they really have stayed faithful to
It's
that kind
hard
of.
to describe,
Yeah, you do still feel like you're playing Final Fantasy VII original, don't you? It's really strange, and unless you've played the original Final Fantasy VII and you've learned its menus and you've learned little things like, I don't know why they couldn't have just called it all materia, by the way, but magnify materia, for example, and being able to use that and put that alongside a cure and cure your whole party, for example. Absolutely, absolutely brilliant. They've really stayed faithful to that. I didn't realise that was going to work so well. It was amazing, and being able to junction that magnify materia to fire, for example, and destroy a load of enemies at the same time. I mean, absolutely brilliant, and they really had stayed faithful.
The
I think.
materia aspect of it. Sorry,
No, yeah,
there's a bit of a delay here, so I do apologise if I do interrupt you.
that's
But
cool,
the
man.
materia aspect of it is brilliant. It's brilliantly done. It's exactly the same as the original. Like you've got your 3 weapon materia slots, and then you've got your 2 equipment slots, and it feels exactly the same. You level it up in the exact same way. There's no real difference, to be honest, from
Yeah.
the original in that sense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, no, absolutely, and the materia as well. I mean, how it's funny materia, isn't it? Actually, I just want to touch on materia because it, it kind of materia does look and feel and exactly how I expected it to. That kind of marble. Um, you almost kind of want to eat it like a gobstopper, don't you? It's amazing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, it just looked really cool, and the way you've got
No,
all your
I
different.
think finding it is really rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. The way you got all your different color codes and stuff like that, for the type of material it is, so you've obviously got your green material for your kind of offensive and cure, um, and that kind of stuff, and then you've got your red material for your summons, um, and your yellow material for stuff like skill and enemy skill, that kind of stuff. It's so true to the original, which is really great. And just on summons, actually, I personally found them brilliant. I really enjoyed them. The way they come into the combat when you're really struggling, and you're able to kind of use
That's
your
very Final
ATB
Fantasy
gauge.
12, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and they kind of did it in Final Fantasy 15 actually, but you couldn't control the summon, and they were ginormous. But that's a different subject. But how have you found the summons?
Yeah, I mean, most of the summons you have to unlock in various different ways. Some of them you find, and some of them you have to do like a combat against that summon to actually unlock it. Again, this is all stuff that wasn't in the this section of the game in the original. You
Yeah.
didn't, the first summon you got was Chocomog, and you didn't get that until a little bit after Midgar. You had left the
Hmm.
city and that,
Yeah.
so you get like 4 or 5 summons before the blooming before you've even left that part of the game.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It was done really well. Um, cool. So, I mean, let's talk about the graphics and the character models and stuff like that, because graphically, this is one of the most beautiful games I've ever played. It really is stunning. I played it on the PS4 Pro. I know you're playing it on the standard PS4, which I know some people have had some issues with. How have you found the graphics and stuff like that?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I've been really, graphically it's perfect. It plays exactly how you want it to do. You do suffer from things such as these particular types of games. They all suffer from the same issue where you'll be running around like a free roam area, but there's be a side street that's got like a little bit of debris that you could easily
Mm.
step over, but you can't get past it, and sometimes it can feel a little wooden in that
Yeah.
regard. But for the most part, I mean, graphically it's stunning to look around. The character models are spot on.
Mm.
Obviously the original didn't have much detail, so we had to imagine a lot of that, and they've
Yeah.
kind of really sort of made it look exactly how we thought it would.
It's true. That's a good point about they didn't have as much detail because for example, Barrett running around normally when he's kind of talking and stuff, you don't even see the gun on his arm. You only really see the gun on his arm during cutscenes or during an actual battle.
Mm.
When his character model obviously looks different during an actual battle scene, and seeing all of those details on the guys, and the details on Aerith's jacket and all of this kind of stuff, and the materia slots on Tifa's gloves, all this kind of stuff. it looks so good, and they really have
I mean,
reimagined these characters perfectly.
going back to what you said earlier, that obviously there's a lot of buzz for Final Fantasy VII over the time since it's come out, and it's obviously become one of the most popular Final Fantasy titles, if not one of the most popular games of all time.
Yeah.
So obviously they created things like the Dirge of Cerberus, the third-person shooter on the PlayStation 2, where you played as Vincent from Final Fantasy VII, and it's obviously all set in it. And of course, they brought out Advent Children and Crisis Core, and I think that might be it. But so obviously we've seen some of these characters be brought over into more modern day graphics, or at least PS2 graphics, and but none of them have really kind of, for me, none of it's really felt like proper Final Fantasy VII, you know, whereas this kind of does, you know, they've hit the nail on the head with that this really does feel like, character-wise, how it looks, how the characters are dressed, you know, little details on them, really does touch on the original sort of masterpiece.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And yeah, just on that, I think was you kind of, when you play the original, you pick up on personalities, you know, and it's funny because you spend the whole time just listening to music and reading dialogue boxes throughout the original, and you know, for them to kind of transition it into you know, fully voice acted, you know, a fully voice acted amazing cinematic, masterpiece, as you say, that's a really difficult thing to do, and I think that they've nailed that. There were a couple of characters that I maybe thought were a little bit over the top sometimes.
We're talking about Wedge.
Yeah, maybe Wedge a little bit. He very, you know, I'm not sure he's kind of comedic slapstick kind of personality fully fits into a game like this. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I agree. I mean, it makes me wonder how they're going to do Catsif, because Catsif was a very comical kind of character. But thankfully, that's not in this version, so they've got time to figure that out.
Yeah, and maybe the same could be argued with Barrett. I mean, I know he is a massive hothead, but sometimes he did come across as way too over the top. But I don't know. I always saw Barrett as a hothead, and I always saw him. As extreme. Maybe I am doing him a bit of a disservice. There was something about Barrett which, on the odd occasion, it was a bit over the top, I felt.
Yeah, it didn't really connect as well as some of the other characters.
No.
I think you've definitely got it there.
Yeah.
I think as well as, I don't know if, obviously because he's made by a Japanese developer, and they're trying to create this kind of American kind of character, whereas every other character kind of feels very Japanesey. You know, they could easily be Japanese or more Western, whereas he is a real Western kind of character made by Japanese. So maybe it just doesn't translate as well in that regard.
I think that's a really good point, because you are right. Some characters, you know, for example, say the likes of Jesse, can come across very anime sometimes, very very kind of cutesy, and you know, we've got to remember that this game is made by Japanese developers in a completely different culture to us. So I'm not slagging that off, but you are right. You know, Barrett does come across as almost like a completely different culture, which is quite funny.
Yeah, I mean, Catsif is the perfect example of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one set of characters, will move slightly on them in a minute. Actually, I'm not going to talk. I was going to talk about baddies now, but I just want to touch on Cloud. So, Cloud, I thought was really well done, because when you think of Cloud, you just think this kind of monotone, kind of badass, emo kind of kid, whereas actually he comes across really well. He does occasionally feel that way, and that's part of his personality, but you do see him warming up to people, you know, as the game progresses.
That's a fantastic point, because there's a bit I just done recently where previously someone was like, oh, we've got to go get Jesse, and he would have been oh yeah, well, it's going to cost you, or oh, you know, as long as the money's there. Whereas I just done a bit with him where they were like, oh, come on, we've got to go get this character. And he's like, yeah, come on, let's go. So he's kind of, his character arc does sort of they've expanded upon it and made it more kind of more real.
Yeah.
So they have done it really well in that
They
regard.
have. He's got a really fantastic personality, and it does come across really well in the voice acting. I think that we spoke about Barrett and Cloud. We have to talk about Tifa. She,
What,
you know,
Tifa?
Tifa, sorry, yeah. It's funny really because a lot of people when they play, people that played the original a long, long time ago, sometimes you can kind of forget that Tifa is actually quite timid, and it's actually Aerith who's kind of the more kind of ballsy, flirty
Outgoing,
kind
yeah.
of one, and they get across that really well in this. Even their relationship's brilliant. They kind of don't know each other to begin with, and then they start kind of bonding by taking the piss out of Cloud every now and then, and I think that works. That works really well. But they do they have done Tifa really well. I think she's the right amount of angry. She's obviously got a lot of anger due to what happens later. With her family and and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to do too many spoilers on that side of things, but she's obviously got her reasons for being in Avalanche, and I think it comes across really well that she's got this kind of pent up anger, but she's maybe able to control it a little bit better than Barrett. And
I mean, one thing we forget with regards to Tifa is that she is fist. She uses her fists to fight. She's not hiding behind a gun or a sword or a staff or something like that. She's actually right in there punching, these enemies in the face and that. So she, even though she is quite a timid character, like you say, you are right. She is quite quiet and kind of like. She's not as outgoing as Aerith, whereas Aerith is kind of running about and come on, let's go do this. Whereas Tifa is very kind of timid in that regard. But she isn't afraid to run over there and start smacking things with a sonic striker knuckle gloves.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the combos that you can produce with her character is just brilliant. Going back to the combat slightly there, just touching on that. Some of the some of the combos that you can produce. When kind of spamming her abilities, and I put on a bit of materia that kind of allowed her ATB gauge to fill up a lot quicker, and it made me able to spam so many different combo abilities with her, using that unbridled strength, to increase her strength, and then just caning a load of these abilities. It knocks their stagger gauge up really quickly, and then you're kind of in there with Cloud in his Punisher mode, and it just really, there's so much synergy with the characters when you're fighting. That
I think maybe, Peter, that you should definitely touch on the combat with that regard. For people who probably haven't played the remake yet. What you obviously mentioned Punisher mode and staggering and stuff like that. I think it would be quite good if you were to sort of maybe give a little sort of brief explanation of how it kind of works in that regard.
So essentially you actually do, and I'm talking about playing on the normal mode here. There's a couple of modes. You can play an easy mode, you can play a classic mode, but we're talking about the normal mode for now. So essentially when you're attacking an enemy, the more you attack the enemy by spamming the attack button, you fill up an ATB gauge. Once that's filled up, you can use either abilities, which are abilities specifically for that character, or you can use magic or items. So magic, you can use stuff like Cure and Thunder and Fire and all of these kind of elemental kind of magic attacks, depending on what an enemy's weak to, or you can use items, so that obviously includes curing items or grenades to attack enemies and stuff like that, and it just really works well. And for example, Cloud, if you hit triangle, he kind of goes into this Punisher mode where he moves a lot slower, but he just does a hell of a lot of damage. And synergizing your characters by swapping to them, you can get some really good some really good kind of combos going. So just as a little example, I would generally go into a battle with preemptive strike materia on, which meant that Cloud instantly had his ATB gauge up, and I would instantly run in there. I would spam an enemy with a certain ability, and then I would be running in there with Tifa and trying to get their stagger up whilst buffing everyone with Barrett. So putting putting barrier on everyone, and shell on everyone, and getting them ready for the fight, just as it's beginning. I would always have a bit of a system in place, and the way that it just synergized around, with the combat is just brilliant. I really enjoyed it
I think
personally.
one of the things that they've done here is that if you were to watch videos of it, it can look a bit hack and slashy. I know Final Fantasy 15 kind of got a bit of a bad rap in some regards
Yeah,
for at least looking hack and slashy. I know that it did have a
yeah,
lot more tactical elements to it. This one has again, it looks hack and slashy. If you'd have just watched the videos of it, maybe that's why I was put off originally.
yeah,
But when you actually do play it, you do get a lot of this same kind of tactical, thinking, oh, I've got to use thunder on that, and I've got to get that stagger bar up for that, and this, that, the other. And with regards to stagger bar, once that's actually reached the top, the enemies become staggered, and you can deal a lot more damage to them. So it's always good to sort of put the pressure on them and get them staggered, so then you can
yeah.
really go in with your heavy attacks and sort of bring them down.
Yeah, because they're completely defenseless when you stagger them, aren't they? So you just cane them with a load of damage, and you really start hitting away at their health. But yeah, no, it's brilliant. The combat, the characters, and I think that the way that it all synergizes, I completely agree with you. On the face of it, it can look a bit hack and slashy, but when you're actually in the battle yourself, you really are making strategic decisions. You're stopping the game, you're deciding what how to get ahead, and you want to be a step ahead of the enemy. You're starting to understand boss patterns, so when you're going to need to start curing, when you're going to need to start using antidote to cure a particular poison that an enemy's kind of about to put on one of your characters. You start to really learn that, and it's quite underrated actually how strategic the combat system is, and
Yeah, definitely.
without a doubt. So I just want to move on to baddies then, if that's cool, because
Yep.
I felt that they really put an emphasis on a lot of these kind of these bad guys. So, yeah, you had Heidegger, you had Scarlet, you had Palmer, you had obviously the president, you had Rufus, Renault, Rude, all of these kind of characters that were in the original, but they were kind of barely touched on, especially in the early stages of the game. Whereas in the remake, wow, I mean, they really do focus a lot individually on each of these characters. Reeve as well, of course, being one of the main ones.
Mm.
Um, Now, I know you've not quite got to the Shinra building yet, but one thing I will say about the Shinra building specifically is how much detail they go into about each individual kind of head of their kind of department. So Hojo, the head of science, Heidegger, the head of kind of war.
Yeah, whereas we've only just been introduced to them at this point, as
Yeah,
in every now and then. And I feel like one issue I do have with regards to this, I know obviously I haven't got to Shimmer building yet, so it's all to be explained. But for me personally, I feel like they've added a lot of things in. Like obviously they've added in Sephiroth a lot earlier, at
yeah,
least in terms of like whatever's going on with him. We won't get on that now, but they've added in other elements as well. They've brought in earlier. Whereas I feel for these baddies that they sometimes they stagger them a bit, and they've got kind of like for example, Sen, who is the head of the Turks, I believe. He's only just started coming into it, and
yeah,
I've played the game for like nearly 25 hours, kind of thing. So
yeah,
there is kind of like I felt that maybe with regards to at least them, they could have brought them in a bit more, maybe had a few more scenes with them interacting with each other. I mean, the ones that they've got in there are really well done, and because I know who they are, that's all fine. But obviously, if you haven't played the original or you
yeah.
haven't played it for ages and you don't really remember, sometimes some of these baddies popping up, you're thinking, oh god, is this another person that I've got to remember, kind of thing.
Do you know what? That's a really good point, because I mean, what about when Katsif just kind of appears? Um,
Yeah, that's not going to make any sense to
I mean,
anyone.
if you are a new player, you would literally be like, "What the fuck was that?" Um, you wouldn't have a fucking clue, would you? It's amazing, but yeah, no, you are right. I mean, when you do get to the Shimmer building, one of my favourite parts of the game. You go through the tour of Shinra, and it's just done so amazingly. Um, So obviously Shinra being the kind of overarching bad guys here, they're the ones that are draining, they're the Mako from the planet, from the live stream, and draining the world. And they kind of pitch themselves as similar to the ancients, who were this kind of ancient breed who kind of weaved Mako and kind of used it, and they done great things with it. They created an amazing world, and the Shinra believe that they're of something called the Promised Land, which is essentially a place completely full of the stuff where they can kind of, in their words, kind of use it for the greater good. But really, someone like Barrett would say they would just cane the live stream and destroy the planet. So
I mean, it's
it's a
interesting. It's interesting you saying that, because obviously in the original, the whole thing about Shinra getting Mako and leading them to the Promised Land and this, that, or the other is kind of, it's important at first, at least for this part of the game when you're in Midgar. But as soon as you leave Midgar and the main quest becomes hunting down Sephiroth and etc., that kind of gets sidelined, and
it does.
you kind of forget about that. It doesn't even really get touched on that much. Whereas
Yeah,
in this, they kind of make it a bit more of a prominent issue,
they
kind of
do,
thing.
and it goes back to what you were saying about expanding on an original story and making it maybe a little more relevant in areas, and that's one thing they've done well. But in this tour, you find out about each individual head of division, and they all have their own kind of speaking parts, when you click on the hologram of them, and it's just done so well. And to see Hojo, this kind of pissed off, crazy mad scientist who literally doesn't really care what Shinra are up to as long as they're funding his experiments. It's just done
Yeah.
so well.
I mean, going back to what I was saying about how they obviously don't introduce characters early enough with regards to the enemies. Obviously, they've kept that exactly the same. So, as the original, they introduce the characters as and when they appear. Sort of like you say, Hojo doesn't come into it until you're in the Shinra building, already quite near the end of Midgar.
Yeah.
Whereas, obviously, that is going to be the same for this. Hojo doesn't come into it to then. But because they've expanded upon that, it seems like it takes so long to get to that. Whereas in the original, it was only like 4 hours, and you had seen all these characters. I've been playing it for 25 hours, and obviously no one like that Hojo hasn't even turned up yet. So
yeah, it's true. It's amazing how much they've expanded, and one good example of that is when the plate falls. So essentially, when essentially Shinra decide that they want to knock a whole plate down and destroy a section of Midgar to make it look like it was Avalanche, and to kind of build up the war against Wutai, a kind of another kind of country across
that's
the
another
world.
subplot that
Yeah,
is not even touched on in the original. I mean, it might
no,
be mentioned like one or two times, and
yeah,
at
it's
least
really
the
minute.
war previously
Yeah.
that made Sephiroth as
Mm.
famous as he was. But in this, they have really kind of expanded on that, which is
No,
really
they have
cool.
absolutely, yeah, and that was one thing done really well, because when the plate falls, just before it falls in the original, Aerith kind of goes, oh, I'll go save Marlene, Barrett's little girl, and she'll go back into Sector 7 where the plate's potentially going to fall, puts herself into danger to save Marlene, whereas in the remake, you actually see what happened, because we then subsequently know that she gets taken by Tsung and the Turks. Marlene is safe and sound, but we don't really know how she was taken. And in remake, we see exactly how it kind of happened. We see the plate fall in. We see parts of the plate fall in. It's so amazingly done, and we see how Tsung manipulates her into saving Marlene but coming freely with him, and it's just done
Yeah.
very well. It looks very much like a kidnap in the original, whereas in this she kind of goes willingly due to the
That's
Turks' manipulation.
That's a great point, actually. And Aeris's mother kind of even mentions that in this remake, whereas obviously, like you say, it does feel like they've just taken her and kidnapped
Yeah,
her, whereas, in this, they've kind of given it a bit more explanation and gone a little more into depth why she's gone with them and
yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah, and it's done. Seeing these things from different perspectives is done very well. I've been super impressed with that. Okay, cool. So, one of the last things I really want to properly focus on, and we have to, and we can I just say we're not going to talk about the ending. We may do a different video for the ending. I also don't want to talk about the whispers as well. You know, they're they're a very very interesting addition to the game. They deserve a whole podcast to themselves. You know, the Watchmen of Fate, you know, whatever you want to call them,
Yeah.
these kind of ghosts that essentially look like they are preserving fate. They're making sure that things go the way the original went. And we won't go into the ending because it's extremely complicated. It deserves its own attention. But Sephiroth, I do want to touch on because I mean, I can't quite remember. You'll remember this, I reckon, Dan. When is the
Yep.
first time we see Sephiroth in the original?
Oh God! Well, we hear about him when
Loads.
you're in the Shimra building.
Yeah,
That's when he's first mentioned. Obviously,
yeah,
Genova breaks out and it all kicks off. And then the first time we really mention him is when you see President Shimra and he's got Sephiroth's sword in
in his
him.
back.
That's when,
Yeah,
yeah, that's when we first kind of realise Sephiroth. But I don't think we physically see him until we're in Calm. Is that the name of the
yeah.
town you get
I
to
think it's
straight after?
calm. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. And you had the flashback, right?
Yeah, I think that is. I think that is definitely the first time that we
Yeah,
see him. We're travelling
yeah.
in the truck with him.
Whereas in the remake,
I couldn't
um,
believe it. Couldn't believe how quick it was.
yeah, I mean, oh, a bit too much, do you think? Or, I mean,
Yeah,
is he
maybe.
now? Is he an enigma? Is he scary anymore? Do you know what I mean? Like, in the original, you see all of these kind of telltale signs that you're following, and you're looking for the man with the black cape, right?
Mm,
And you know, you come across the snake and this giant snake. You know, did Sephiroth do this? You know, look at the size of
yeah,
this thing. You know, um, and you know all of this kind of stuff, and you kind of hear so much about him, and you see him in the flashback and see how powerful he is in Cloud's flashback,
mm.
or and I can't help but kind of feel that that's been slightly taken away now because we've
Yeah.
seen
No, I do
so much
totally
of
agree.
him.
For me, one thing that I noticed is I don't know whether this is bad or whether it's good. So it's up there. But for me, in the original, I felt like Sephiroth didn't really care about Cloud and these other people. He was doing his own thing. He was there to go and summon Meteor. He was there to do with whatever the fuck he was going on in the North Crater, with whatever the reunion was and all that. He was
Yeah.
doing his thing, and the rest of us, we were following him. Following his aftermath pretty much
Hmm.
to try and catch up to him so he can kick his ass. Whereas in this, he's kind of taken more of a shine to Cloud,
Yeah.
and Cloud is, prominent to his plan. Cloud
Yeah.
is relevant, for him to.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you know what? Again, we're not touching on the ending, but it kind of makes sense with the ending, um, because the Sephiroth that we see in remake is not necessarily the same one in the original. There's a lot of talk about time travel and Sephiroth kind of coming back, traveling back in time, to try and change fate because he knows he loses. Um,
Mm.
so there's a lot of kind of talk about that, and that may well
It's a
explain.
very interesting theory, and it could
Yeah, no,
easily
it is,
sort
and
out all these issues that you have, particularly with that last
yeah,
chapter of the game
for
and
sure,
stuff
for
like that.
sure. And I really, really want to do another um, conversation with you when about this. Once we've both kind of properly taken in the ending and we can both put our own opinions across about it. I really want to, but it does feed into what you're saying. But the one thing I will say, and I just really want to touch on something else that I really love just quickly, and it is to do with him, is when I don't know if you noticed this, but when the first reactor blows up,
Hmm.
and you're kind of by the way, how amazing was it walking through the streets of
I
all
was
of the?
actually going to bring this up
Yeah,
a minute ago, but I felt like we had already gone past this point. So I'm really glad that you did. For me,
yeah,
I thought that was a brilliant touch. And because it's so early on in the game, where I am still very skeptical of, oh, do I like this? I haven't adjusted to the combat at this point. And I'm thinking, oh, is this as good as the original? Or is it worthy? Whatever.
yeah,
For me, that was a really good moment of
yeah,
walking around Sector 1, I believe. And,
yeah,
you know, you can really see the aftermath of,
yeah.
you know,
What
obviously
you've done.
Jessie believes that she was the one who had done the bomb because she had made it, but really
That's right.
Shinra had obviously done this, that, or the other.
Yeah,
And but she honestly did. In fact, she I know this is obviously spoiler in that section, but she really died. She even dies believing that
yeah,
she deserved it
for
because of what
sure.
she had done there. You
Yeah,
know.
it's true, and it's quite it's this dramatic irony, isn't it? Because they all blame themselves. Biggs, Ware, Jan, Jesse, they all and you know Barrett's the only one who kind of takes it on the chin and says, "Oh, this is for the greater good." You know, Tifa's quite strong, but she feels bad about it. But Jessie takes it really hard because she believes it was her bomb that did that when it was actually Shimra's trying to manipulate the public to think it was Avalanche. But do you know something in that section, Dan, which I don't know if you noticed, which is if you didn't, you're going to have to rewatch it because it's
Okay.
amazing. When you're walking through that section and you can kind of see all the firefighters and all the people distraught with their homes are destroyed, and it really hits hard what you've done,
Mm,
and it really is quite a hard kind of walk. But when Sephiroth does appear and you see all of the burning buildings and Cloud's having
mm,
all of his kind of visions, I don't know if you
yeah.
noticed, but some of the buildings in Cloud's head change to thatched roofs and stuff like that
Yes,
on
which were
fire.
like his
People home.
hometown. Yeah,
Exactly.
that's it. I didn't want to attempt to say it because I didn't want to embarrass myself. But yeah, that town.
But how amazing is that? I mean, what attention to detail. You know, for people who have played the original, they understand that, again, spoiler territory here, but, Sephiroth burning down Cloud's hometown and stuff like that. Um, and Cloud kind of hasn't remembered that yet. He's kind of having a bit of a kind of an amnesiac moment, and he kind of
Mm.
he kind of sees these thatched roofs, and he sees these different styles of buildings burning. And again, as a new player, you're probably thinking, "What the hell is this? This isn't a Midgar building," And it's just done so well, and that is one thing. And I kind of want to. I kind of want to end on some real positives about this game, and
Well,
that,
before we get to that,
yeah,
sorry, can I just interrupt there
yeah, please do.
with a sort of a semi-negative? I mean, don't get me wrong, um, but obviously they touch on that later as well. You see Cloud outside his mum's house, and
That's
you
right.
know, and obviously Sephiroth hints that you know what has happened there, and of course we see again later on we see Tifa as a kid, and that, and obviously all of that kind of gets explained in Calm or even in
Yeah,
Cloud's actual memory. You know, when you run around as Tifa inside his head when they both fall into the Mako, and I feel that if you are a new player, say for example, you've heard about Final Fantasy 7, you missed the boat on Final Fantasy 7 because you don't want to go back and play the game where people have got squares for hands. That would be terrible. You know, you've missed the boat on it. So,
yeah,
but you've heard all about it. So you thought, oh, you know what? I'll pick up the original. In that regard, I don't think the original is for a new person, new to the series, or at
right.
least new to Final Fantasy 7. I don't think it's made for them. I know they did market it in that way and said, oh yeah, this is for new and old players. But
Mm,
really, a lot of things that don't get explained in this that they touch on is only known by obviously fans of the original. I mean,
yeah,
obviously, since when they've got all the other sequels out, if and when they do that, then obviously, yeah, as a whole thing, it would make a lot more sense. But for now, it's a lot of people are left wondering, what the
yeah,
fuck is that all about?
yeah. That you're absolutely right, and I did think that as well. And with regards to a follow up to the, yeah, you're right. If you could play the whole entire series of Final Fantasy VII Remake now, it would make a lot more sense. If people have to wait another 2, 3, 5 years for the next edition of this to come out,
And that's
in
just the next
Christ,
part.
it can't be 5 years, can it? But
God, no.
but if it is, then there's gonna be a lot of unanswered questions for them. But I do agree with you. I really don't think Final Fantasy VII Remake is necessarily for a new player who wants to enter the Final Fantasy universe. I think play it because it's an amazing game, but I also think play a previous Final Fantasy, play 15, play Final Fantasy 9, play Final Fantasy 10, and of course play Final Fantasy 7, go back to the original, but you won't have the same nostalgia feeling we have, obviously, and the same, affiliation we've got with it. But I do kind of agree with you. It's a really kind of dodgy territory recommending this game to somebody, because if you haven't played the original, you kind of you lose a lot. And
Yeah,
I
definitely.
wonder if this game didn't have all of the nostalgic feels, if it didn't have the nods and all of that, would I have just played this as a decent Final Fantasy game? Potentially, I don't know.
Well,
Um,
yeah, no, I think you would have, because, like we've touched on earlier, the combat is solid. The combat works.
yeah,
And like just briefly going back to combat in other games, other Final Fantasy games, where it's kind of this style of combat where you've got to watch everybody's health, but you're not really in a turn-based situation. You're running
yeah,
around hacking and flashing. Someone could die without you knowing. Whereas in this, the screen flashes red when someone's almost dead, so you kind of do get notified by that. So
yeah,
the combat is solid. They've done good work with that. Obviously, a lot of the gameplay with regards to materia and stuff, touch is the same as it was on the original, which was
mm,
pretty spot on. So
yeah,
gameplay wise, mechanic wise, it plays fine. So even if it didn't have the Final Fantasy 7, even if Final Fantasy 7 never existed, this game would still be pretty solid in that regard.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no, I think you've summed that up really well, actually. Yeah, no, I do completely agree, and I think overall, this game for me, I think I said to you when I completed it, Dan, and I truly believe this, and I still stand by this. This game for me, if I had to grade it out of 10, it would be, it would be an 8.9 out of 10, and the reason it's an 8.9 out of 10 is because I'm skeptical of the ending. Now fuck it, you know what? I will say 9 out of 10. But
No, you've gone for it.
I've gone for it. I will say 9 out of 10. I think this game, with the exception of the ending, was a true remake. I think it was a I think it was a near perfect remake. It's got its faults, but what game doesn't? I mean,
Hmm.
I can't think of a game that you and I.
Especially remake games, kind
Oh,
of thing.
absolutely.
Like
Yeah,
Resident Evil 2, I thought it was spot on. And for me, that still had some faults in it, kind of
yeah,
thing. And so this, that has the same thing going on. It's spot on. There are
mm,
a lot of faults in it, of course.
yeah,
But we haven't even touched on, obviously, we haven't got time now, but we haven't even touched on things that were added into the game, such as like Jesse's side mission and
yeah,
additional other
yeah,
stuff as well. So they
yeah.
have really kind of gone for it and added as
Mm,
much as they really could into this short
yeah.
section of the game.
Well, maybe that's a bit of a call to action for us. Maybe we could maybe we could put together another kind of little podcast about the differences between the original and between remake. Literally just talk through the additions and the changes that they've added. That could be something we could explore. But for
Yeah.
now, I think, for like I say, for me, ridiculously brilliant game. I was slightly skeptical, but as you were going into this, I am all in. I look forward to playing more. I can't wait to play more. I am going to replay it on hard and give that a go. I definitely am looking forward to watching some of those scenes again, because there's
Mm,
a few
yeah, definitely.
things. There's a few things, like, for example, Corneo's Colosseum fight, where there's actually, I don't know if you would have noticed this, because it's so hectic when you're in the Colosseum fighting, but they've actually got big pictures of Cloud up on the
Yeah,
screen, and it's just
I
so
only saw that
cool.
in the aftermath when you sort
Yeah,
of after you've won and the crowd's cheering and that.
it's
But like you
so
say,
cool.
that this whole bit that we're just describing now isn't in the original at
No,
all.
no, at all, exactly. And there's so many cool things that aren't in the original that we definitely will want to go through in a kind of a future episode. So yeah, I think expect more episodes of Final Fantasy VII from us. And yeah, Dan, any final thoughts on Final Fantasy VII Remake?
No, I mean, I've been really enjoying it. I would probably so far give it an 8. Definitely
Yeah,
an 8. I mean, it's not perfect, but it is a near perfect remake of Final Fantasy 7,
yeah,
kind of thing. I know it's a bit hard to say. It's not a perfect game in that sense, but it is a perfect remake of Final Fantasy
yeah,
7. Of course, they expanded upon it, which is one of my favourite things that I believe a remake should do.
sure.
But yeah, definitely a solid game, and I'm looking forward to later down the line, maybe even replaying it with yourself,
Yeah,
and then
yes.
that would open plan a whole new level.
Yeah, that would be really, really cool. I look forward to that. Okay, well, thank you for everyone for listening. This has been our first episode of the Bearded Robot podcast. We want to do more. We want to do more of this kind of stuff. If people enjoy it, let us know. It's amazing what someone just saying, you know what, I listened to your podcast and I loved it, and or you could have, maybe you could tweak this, or maybe you could tweak that. Little kind of bits of feedback and stuff like that will really make it worthwhile for us doing. So thanks for everyone for listening, and yeah, we'll see you in the next chapter.
Take care.